Okay, we'll just wait for more people to come in. Check the sound and then we will get going. Also, I'll turn on my phone so that Joe can interrupt me halfway through. Wouldn't really be a Sunday night newsletter without that, so let's make sure that's all working. Hey everybody, hey. So I'll do the boring bit, the self-indulgent bit before most people come in. Farid Alidou scored his first goal for House Fouls this weekend. Try and find it because he's raw and he's still learning the game, still learning the senior game. But really nicely taken goal over the weekend against Jan Regensburg. Just sort of gallops away from his marker and just he's got such a lovely easy stride. And then comes into the box on the right-hand side, cuts across the goalkeeper, scores. Brilliant. Also, if you do find that goal, watch how all of his teammates react to it, because I think that tells you sort of, like how well he's thought of at the club, but also how much is expected of him. It's just really nice to see a young player succeed. Right, so housekeeping. How is the sound? That's the most important thing. I've cranked the gain up a little bit, and the volume, so I might be booming into YouTube. Might just be a bit too loud, but do let me know. Tonight we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about aspects of the Man United weekend because there's quite a lot to unpack there. Also going to talk about Harry Winks because we'll get to that in a little bit. I was playing about with maybe doing some kind of goal of the weekend thing, but I think that's quite naff. So just as and when there's a good goal to highlight, that's probably true, Dan. You can't crank something a little bit. Okay, well, I tickled the sound up. How's that? How does that work? So we might just every now and again highlight it, talk about it. And so first up, Keita Balde, who saw his goal against the Swallow this afternoon. If you haven't, it's one of those where I think everyone can relate to it because we've all tried to do this at some point, like when you're messing about in the park. So dropping ball, he's got his back to goal. He's probably around the penalty spot. Ball just drops over his shoulder in a nice sort of arc. Turns around and it's somewhere between. It's not a bicycle kick. It's not a scissor kick. It's somewhere right between, and he catches it absolutely flush, and goes in off the crossbar. Which two things to talk about. Like, firstly, if you or I try to do that, well, it won't speak for you. If I try to do that at 37, I would probably kick the ball the other way, knee myself in the face, and end up in hospital. But also, like, the key is you just, to get that level of contact, it's incredibly difficult to do. It's a wonderful goal, and go and see it. The other thing about that is it made me realise, or it kind of reminded me, how important goalkeepers are to the aesthetic of a goal when it's been scored. Because the Sassuolo goalkeeper doesn't really move. It's almost like he misjudges it. So the ball, Keita's contact is so good that it just whips past him off the underside of the bar and into the net. And he's kind of left looking really clumsy, sort of waving his arms a little bit and staggering back towards his line. And like, it's this weird thing where goalkeeper has an obligation to a good goal. Like, obviously, first of all, to save it, but also don't ruin it by just dive or stay still, or, don't kind of land somewhere in the middle. But that was fun. Also, we'll do a little bit more hipster stuff. So first time I've seen this over the weekend, St. Pauli got battered 4-0 by Darmstadt, and they made 4 substitutions at half time, like in the dressing room. I've never seen it before. And that's partly because of the new substitution rule, but I don't think I've ever seen a quadruple change before a half begins. And that's kind of one where, like, you can imagine yourself being in the dressing room, like might be sort of a little bit too far back for some people, but there was a documentary in the 90s called Orient Club for a Fiver, and I'm sure it still exists somewhere on YouTube, but basically went inside and in the dressing room at half time, and the manager's kind of squaring up to players and sacking people and telling people they're not going to have a job on Monday, and he's substituting people. And it felt like it might be quite like that, with a sort of a coach saying, right, 4 of you, centre midfielder, centre back, left back, forward, all off at the same time. And it's just one of those where you just think it's just I don't know how a team responds to that, but it was Yeah, it was not a good day for St. Pauli, but yeah, kind of quirky. I don't know if anybody else has seen that. Not four substitutions at the same time, four substitutions at the same time at halftime. That's the important bit. Okay, let's talk about Man United. The Watford game itself, we'll probably get to on the podcast tomorrow. It's JJ, Joe, and I, so we'll dive deep into aspects of that. Yeah, it does sound like Dr. Richter's halftime management joke, exactly. But I wanted to talk about the response because it strikes me as very, very strange. I think certainly over the last year, we've all heard some of these words used to describe Man United, like underprepared and undercoached, and that's the key thing. And what we know about Ole Solskjaer is that he was less a head coach, more a kind of overseer. So anecdotally, according to kind of reports, on the training ground, he was more the sort of in the Ferguson mold, whereby he would allow his coaching staff just to get on with kind of the drilling and the kind of the creation of training sessions and that kind of stuff. And like he would have had an outline for what he wanted the team to do, but then he left the mechanics of enacting that to people like Kieran McKenna and Michael Carrick. So what strikes me as really strange is that United's problems, certainly over the last couple of months, have been we have a game plan, but we don't know how to do it. So he talked after the Liverpool game about, right, well, we wanted to have a high press in this match, but there was no high press. So, okay, you wanted to have something, but you couldn't implement it, which is a coaching failure. Same kind of problem against Manchester City because they were so passive. They didn't really lay a glove on City during that game. And Watford was full of all kinds of technical, mental issues. So the problem is that you sack Solskjaer, and I got no problem with that. There's really no way to go. But you keep the coaching staff. So Carrick is still there, McKenna is still there, Mike Phelan is still there. So from Manchester United's perspective, what they seem to have got rid of is the guy that dealt with thematics and culture, and he probably needed to go, yes, but surely you get rid of everything, no? Because if Michael Carrick is going to be, he's going to kind of lead this sort of interim team for, don't know, Man United are talking about getting an interim manager in for the rest of the season, so I guess that makes Carrick an interim, if there is such a thing. But what do you expect to improve when all the people responsible for this team's faltering mechanics are still there? It doesn't really make a sense because it seems like Man United have been given a decision which they have no option but to take, and yet they still seem to have got it wrong somehow. And yeah, Joe, that's a fair point from Joe. He says you can't sack the coaching staff when you play Villarreal midweek, and yeah, you do need to prepare for things, but then at the same time, like Michael Carrick has now worked under 4 different Man United head coaches, but also there's no indication yet, and I could be wrong, this could change very, very quickly, it's a pretty fluid situation at United, but there seems to be no desire to sort of shunt all of the coaching staff out, and maybe after this Champions League round, possibly, but it seems to represent very muddled thinking, like people at Man United who want things to change, but don't really know how to change them. And this is part of the problem. So now we're going to have a situation where they hunt an interim, and a couple of names. Laurent Blanc has been suggested. It's kind of a strange one out of left field. I mean, you don't have to pick former Man United players to coach the side, but who's making that decision? Like, where is the footballing intelligence at the club? So, for instance, if this was a situation at Manchester City, you'd know that Chicky Berigstein is a former player, but he's also kind of an experienced executive. So he sits somewhere between like a technocrat and a former player. He has that sort of best of both worlds. At Man United, you just think, right, there's Edward Wood there, and he's leaving. There's Richard Arnold, who's supposedly going to be taking his job. There's various members of the Glazer family, John Murtaugh. So who is feeding into the conversation whereby people say, okay, well, we like this guy because he does this, and this well, and it suits players X, Y, and Z in our squad, that's the road forward. It doesn't fill me a lot of confidence. It's just a very I don't know, just feels very Man United in this era, very very Glazer era Man United, and it's dispiriting. And again, it's like, I remember a couple of weeks ago, I think it was after the City game, where obviously Solskjaer came under an awful lot of pressure, and Man United briefed the press saying, we have absolutely no plans to get rid of the manager. I was like, okay, that's for what it's worth. That was a show of faith. And then when you come to this situation, the Watford game is so bad that your hand is forced, but then it also exposes the fact that there's no succession plan whatsoever. There's no strategy for what to do next. And I think if you look at the Premier League at the moment, if you look at the recent sackings, so Dean Smith at Villa, Nuno Espirito Santo at Spurs, when those happened, I mean, Newcastle's a slightly different case, but when those previous two sackings occurred, Daniel Farke at Norwich, 3, they clearly, given the speed with which replacements were in place, those clubs clearly knew what they were going to do next. And they're all clubs that are significantly smaller and less resourced than Manchester United. And yet they were better prepared. They knew of a direction. They had presumably shortlists, and they moved very, very quickly through them. And they were able to put someone in place before the international break started, or during the international break, where you have a little bit of time on the training pitch. Man United left it until the international break was over. Their conviction faltered after Vicarage Road, and now they're kind of ad-libbing their response, which doesn't, I don't know, it feels a very strange way for one of the biggest clubs in world football to behave. That's all. And it seems like no one really knows what the problem is, let alone what the solution might be. So, weird one. Harry Winks. I don't want to bore on about Spurs, but I do want to talk about Harry Winks because he exists in a really strange place. I think we all know that academy products at football clubs, they have a little bit more latitude with most fans because there's a kind of residual loyalty there, and I like that aspect of the game. It's nice, it's good, the game is better for it. Winks over the last year and a half, maybe even 2 years, probably going back to when Mauricio Pochettino was still at the club, has had a really, really tough time with fans. Like, it feels like a lot of people have turned against him and have kind of given up on him, which is a shame because he was a very bright footballer when he first appeared. He suffered a very nasty ankle injury at Turf Moor when he was actually at that game, when he was tackled and he kind of skittled into the technical area, right in front of Schondeitsch's feet. It's a very, very ugly moment, and his career's never quite been the same. And there's this kind of very negative atmosphere around him. And so today, I was really interested because Spurs have a massive issue in central midfield because they don't have, amongst that group of players, there isn't a 2. You wouldn't pick 2 players from that and say that is what that fits the criteria of an Antonio Conte midfield. So they're kind of, between now and January, they're dependent obviously on Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, but I think also Harry Winks because he's really he's a bit more durable than Giovanni Lo Celso, who just can't stay fit, unfortunately. Tanguy Ndombele, Conte's comments about him in midweek were quite interesting about how he needs to learn to play for the team. And so you'd expect there to be a little bit of a process now. It was not surprised that he didn't play today. So really, it's sort of by a process of elimination, Conte is left with Højbjerg and Winks. And Winks had a terrible first half. Like, he looked lost. He looked like he was trying to do too much. And Leeds were by far the better team. And part of the reason was the midfield was a mess. But then what I thought was interesting was after half time, I think Conte described it as him showing personality. And that's exactly right, because Winks is a flawed player. He's not, let's not over exaggerate what he is. But what he's always been able to do is express himself on a football pitch. I remember being at White Hart Lane for his debut when he was dropped in against West Ham and just told to run central midfield. And he's not inhibited. It's a strange personality trait of his, and it's something Pochettino used to talk about. Like, you give him the ball and he'll start passing the ball forward. And that's a very precious quality in a young player, particularly young midfielder. And so now you have a situation where Tottenham and Winks have arrived at a situation where, despite whatever's happened over the last couple of years, they kind of need what he does. And you saw him rise to that a little bit. Like he was, I think I'm right in saying that he actually ran further than any other player on the pitch, which is really, really impressive, particularly against Leeds, because it's not as if Leeds are sort of physically underprepared. And he was good. He was, I think what I like about him, and one of the reasons why I kind of, the criticism and the negativity around him has always tweaked me a little bit, is because he tries to affect a game, and like fitness and confidence, and these are all important things, but like it's a willingness just to be brave with the ball. Brian Clough used to talk about, so I know that's like a kind of a dated reference, but Brian Clough used to talk about players with courage on the ball, and that's like a proper football manism in today's world, and yet it kind of it's very, very true. It's very, very apt, because you have players who are willing just to shuffle the ball from side to side or not make mistakes in kind of an era of total stats coverage. That's very, very common. But you also have players that are willing to take risk with the ball and do things with it and chop lines and take defenders out of the game, and that's very, very precious. And Winks did well. Spurs hugely unconvincing, a lot to do, but it was nice to see. Anyway, let us pick a few questions. Joe will call me in a little minute, so let's try and get one in before we do that. Ethan Hansen, that is a terrible opinion. Danny Drinkwater. I don't even know where Danny Drinkwater is playing at the moment. I think he was in Turkey briefly a couple of seasons ago. I know he was at Burnley and Villa. I think he might still be at Chelsea. Yeah, Derby beat Bournemouth today. Good point, Jack Brown. I haven't seen this game yet, but I think there's hang on, sorry, we will go back to that. Sorry. Joe Devine, hello, good buddy.
Hello, I wasn't ready for you. I thought you were going to carry on talking about Harry Winks.
You're in my head a little bit, because I
Sure.
it's like I don't know what the kind of the phone call version of just hearing footsteps is. Like I'm always expecting the call to ring and to be silenced and you to direct me.
Well, I was enjoying reading the chat when you were talking about Harry Winks, because it appears several people just think he's rubbish. So that was quite fun. Someone asked if you were a Spurs fan, and I gleefully said yes. Yes, you are.
Yeah, look at my eyes. I'm not a happy person. Like, of course I am. Like, do I look like I've been exposed to 37 years of successful football? No.
Sure.
I'm bitter and twisted and old, and there's. Yeah. Anyway, let's not go down that.
You know what you have been exposed to, though.
Tell me.
It's The Athletic. And if you visit theathletic.com/TIFOIRL, you'll find that you can currently get a 30-day free trial to try The Athletic for free for 30 days. And you don't want to miss out, Seb, because tomorrow there's a really good Ole Gunnar Solskjaer read.
What is that? Is that a backgrounder? Is that the kind of the? Is that a sort of an autopsy on his management? What happened?
I think it has everything that one might want to know about what has occurred over this weekend, and a little bit more. It's been certainly it's been very interesting for me to read about. One question I did want to ask you, though, before you take any more from the audience, is who would you pick to be your interim at this point? I thought Steve Bruce would be fun.
Thank you, Joe. Okay. Steve Bruce might be fun, and I promise you, we're recording, this is live, but for people who are watching recorded, we're doing this on a Sunday night. I promise you, by Tuesday, some veteran British media columnist will have suggested Steve Bruce for the manager job. Because it always happens. Like any time Man United have a vacancy, someone goes, yeah, let's give it to Steve Bruce or Brian Robson, or it's kind of this weird affliction whereby we must push ex-Man United players into the Manchester United job at all opportunities. Who do I like? It won't be popular. I quite like giving Lucien Favre a go. I know. It's not a name, but I'll tell you why. Because he got a tune out of Jadon Sancho, and Jadon Sancho represents a massive investment for Man United. And Roy Keane, yeah, no, I'd like to see that cousin Groypley. But I want to see someone that can bind the fibres of this team, this group of players together, because there is a team there somewhere. And until the end of the season, that really wouldn't be a bad option at all. I know he didn't have the greatest end to his time at Borussia Dortmund, but Sancho did play well under him, and it'd be kind of interesting. Graham Potter for interim, you crazy Prem saga, no chance. It would cost an absolute fortune. Also, like, I think you have to. This is an interesting theme, actually. I'm glad you brought that up. You have to, like, for someone like Graham Potter, as your star is rising, you have to be really, really, really careful about where you position yourself and when you take your next steps up the ladder, because you're probably only going to get one chance at a club of that size. Because if, say, okay, for example's sake, let's say Graham Potter walks into Manchester United tomorrow, it's his big club chance, and if he fails, it becomes this probably becomes an indelible asterisk against him, and like, right, can't manage at that level. He gets put in the pile with people like Mark Hughes. Actually, Mark Hughes got a Manchester City job when they were ascending to what they're becoming now. I'm just going to put my phone on silent because Joe will lecture me about that if I don't. And if you fail in that position, you move into that category forever, as Mark Hughes did, as I still think Brendan Rodgers does. I don't think he's going to end up at Manchester United. I think he's going to be at that sort of Leicester level forever. Nuno Espirito Santo, good example. It's not quite Man United, of course, but got his chance at Spurs. Now will always be seen as, well, he should be at kind of a Wolves level forever. So that's quite difficult. Roberto Di Matteo, no, I don't think so. Joe is sending me your questions. So Ethan asks, if Rodgers leaves, would Potter move to Leicester? I think Leicester would interview Potter. I don't know. Given what Leicester's trajectory is, I think something strange is going on there. Something very odd. So I don't know quite where Rodgers is, and I'm not sure that someone like, at this particular moment in time, I'm not sure Potter would leave Brighton for Leicester. And Leicester are interesting. Like, Joe and I were talking about this before the weekend, because we ahead of the weekend we plot the games we're going to watch and the games we're likely going to talk about, and whichever of JJ and Alex is on the pod, we all talk about it together. And I remember Joe saying, Leicester are boring because Leicester aren't very good. And I thought that was kind of harsh. And I sat down to watch it on Saturday, and you just think, God, there's so many mental errors. Like, there's so many repeated mistakes. Like set pieces. That set piece with Rudiger was strange. That was bizarre. But also getting caught with the ball upfield, or allowing players to carry the ball through midfield. Like, Leicester have done this. If you watch their sort of last probably 5 to 10 games, not all of these moments resulted in a goal, but the amount of times that you get ball carriers just going straight down the middle of Leicester's midfield, it's very strange, and it suggests a kind of a disconnect somewhere between the playing staff and the coaching staff. I don't know what it is or why that is, but maybe one for maybe an IRL video of the future, possibly. Right, we have more. Michael asks, do any solid managers even want to go to United anymore? Also a really good question, Michael, because one of the names we've all heard mentioned is Zinedine Zidane. And it's kind of assumed that Zinedine Zidane would jump at the chance to manage Manchester United. But would he? Like, is anyone... I don't know, maybe there are some reports out there quoting his response to that, or suggesting otherwise. But it seems like you have a good example of that reputation thing again. He has won 4 European Cups. He has like an almost unparalleled reputation. It's very, very rare that you get someone that's won that much who doesn't seem to obviously stand for something. Like, he's not... Zidane is not a high priest of the game in the kind of the Guardiola sense, or what Mourinho used to be, or what Klopp is. Like, you don't think necessarily of a particular type of football. You just think of success. And if you're Zinedine Zidane, would you go into Man United as it is now, like with a slightly uneven, lopsided playing squad, with a kind of a group of stars and a group of young players, and a little bit of a chasm in between? Also, that footballing intelligence, or lack of footballing intelligence issue that we talked about before. Like, okay, this is one of the things that affects the coaching staff, but also it affects recruitment. So it's one of the reasons why Man United ended up with an aging Cristiano Ronaldo at the top of their formation at the beginning of the seasons, because people at the top of the club make reactionary decisions. They don't necessarily think in sort of 2-3 year cycles. And part of like, I know that's part of big club life is managing big egos, big players, superstars. But if you're Zinedine Zidane, you think that's a mess. I want someone to go in there first and correct the trajectory a little bit, and then maybe you talk. But why would you risk the reputation that he has? Because all of a sudden you potentially put a failure on your CV next to all of those European Cups, and it's a I don't know, a risk not really worth taking. I'd be very, very surprised if he ends up there. Who do I think? Hey, Declan, great shout, Julian Lopetegui. Yeah, the thing about that though is that I don't think you can get Lopetegui out of Sevilla in the middle of a season. I think that, and also I don't think you want to do that. I think you want to, with someone like that, I think you need to do that in kind of early June and allow a summer and create a rebuild around him. Do Man United, again, footballing intelligence, are Man United capable of doing that? Can they assemble pieces around a head coach in a coherent way? Don't know. Rupes wants to my thoughts on Dembele. Kind of covered that earlier, Rupes. If you wait for the live stream to end, then it's right at the beginning. More interestingly, Ishtiak asks, Ernesto Valverde, one of the great anomalies of European football, because Valverde's never in the running for any jobs. And it's funny because his time at Barcelona, obviously in his first season, moved them to a 4-4-2, moved them away from what Enrique had tried to institute, which was kind of not purely Cruyffian in the Guardiola sense, but more loyal to what Barcelona stand for. And it feels like Valverde's career, ever since he departed, has been characterized by that weird energy that existed between him and the Barcelona fans during his time at the club, where he was never really popular. And it was always like, well, you come from an athletic club and you're not really our vision of what a Barcelona head coach should look like. And there's a few too many long passes, not long balls. I mean, it's not like this didn't sort of turn Barcelona into kind of late 80s Wimbledon, but they were more direct and they moved away from their kind of the house style. It feels like Valverde's been painted by that ever since. It's extraordinary. He's never. Okay, I can understand why Man United might not want to appoint a Valverde, but no one seems to. Like no one. I don't know. I can't even remember the last time that I heard of him making a shortlist or being kind of in the running in inverted commas. Right, more from Joe. He's correct in my Lopetegui pronunciation. This is what I have to put up with. Like, even live. Like this is anyway. Best Aussie Premier League player from Best Average Gaming. Right, great question, because there's a couple, and it's Harry Kewell's the obvious one, because briefly before injuries took hold and before he went to Liverpool, like Kewell was a wonderful footballer. There's a goal he scores with the outside of his left foot against, I think, Sheffield Wednesday, late 90s. Go and look it up. Just a wonderful, classy, elegant footballer at his best. And Mark Viduka's another shout. So, Joe, the thing that I always have with Mark Viduka is he was one of those players that he seemed to sort of oscillate wildly between being, at his best, almost undefendable, because he was that sort of shape of forward before it became popular. He was a kind of a forward line and a single player. Like, obviously he came his career coincided with two-man striker teams, and yet he had the physique and the abilities and the skill set to probably play as a single forward. So he would have been better in a different era. At his best, brilliant. At his worst, he could look like a pub player. Like he just, there was something about him. I don't know whether that might have been a kind of a trick of his body shape, because he was quite a chunky guy. But he had some disinterested moments. Brett Emerton was a very, very good player. Tony Popovich was quite a good championship defender, although like Tony Popovich's career has forever been tainted by that ridiculous back-heeled, whatever, however you describe it, that sort of that own goal that kind of flies off his heel, goes straight in the top corner of his own net when he was at Palace, which was Dan Preston said Mark Viduka moved like a pub player. Fair. I think someone that doesn't probably get mentioned enough is Mark Bosnich. Bosnich, the end of his career in England was complicated, clearly, because of the ban and because of the way he left Chelsea. and I think he would acknowledge that he probably could have got a little bit more out of his talent, but in terms of his ability, like also a real trailblazer in terms of Australian goalkeepers and also the style of goalkeeping. Like he was like really, really gifted shot stopper, and it's kind of sad that when he left Villa, went to Man United, he played. He was never going to be probably a long-term number one for Man United, but he had. I remember him having an amazingly good game in what's now the. I think it was the Super Cup, or no, it might have been the Intercontinental Cup. Look it up. But he was no, Steve. I don't hate Tim Cahill. I just think that I don't know. I always felt like Tim Cahill stayed at Everton a little bit too long. I'd have loved to have seen what Tim Cahill would have done with better service around him. Like he's like one of the things that we nearly talked about, which was kind of on the agenda, was how small players can be good in the air. So Cahill's obviously a really good example of that. And I wanted to talk about Diego Yotta's little assist header from Saturday evening. But Cahill's a good example of that. Just got great technique, great timing, like great understanding for where the ball was going to be. And that's an ageless quality. It's something that would have probably have allowed him to play in any era. And good player. And probably the problem with Cahill, I think, was his heading was so good that it made him seem one-dimensional in a way that he wasn't. Like we all remember that World Cup goal he scored against Holland, that volley that went in off the underside of the bar. It's a brilliant goal. And yet it's not something you associate with Cahill, because you think of him, when someone says his name, you think, he's at the near post, scoring goals from attacking free kicks or corners, and he's punching the corner flag, and that's Tim Cahill. That's his identity. And that's probably why when people like me remember Australian players in the Premier League, you think of a Kuehl first, even though Kuehl's prime probably was much, much shorter than Tim Cahill's. Be interesting to know what the reaction to those players is like back in Australia, actually, because I have absolutely no idea. Did I miss the Harry Winks chat? Drizzlebug, you did, but as soon as the chat ends, sorry, Ethan, the Netherlands, as soon as the chat ends, you can go back, and I think it's probably about 10 or 15 minutes in. And that will probably do it, because we're just over the half an hour mark now. So thank you so much for dropping in. I hope everyone enjoys whatever's left of your weekend and your week coming up. Next week I'm in England, so we'll probably do this from the office, and Joe will be not just on the phone but lurking menacingly in the background. So that is a different kind of threat entirely to the live stream. But I hope everyone's enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all next week. Bye bye.